Have you ever wondered why Cleopatra, the most powerful queen of ancient Egypt, would spend hours before sleep immersing herself in milk? Not just any milk, but the milk of donkeys. Why donkey milk? Why at night? Was this only about beauty? Or was it part of a secret far stranger than any history book tells? Close your eyes. Take a slow breath. Let your body sink into the pillow. Before we begin this journey together, tell me, where are you watching from tonight? Is it night where you are? Is the moon out? Or is it morning creeping in while you search for rest? Leave a comment and share your place in the world. Then relax, gently close your eyes, and listen. If you love strange, forgotten, soothing stories from history, this channel is for you. Subscribe if you haven't already. This is where history becomes sleep, and sleep becomes a mystery. Now let's drift back to a time when the world was quieter, and the night meant more than just dreams. Imagine the palace of Cleopatra, the queen of the Nile. Alexandria glows outside, but here, in the royal chambers, all is dim. The great library is silent. The scholars have put away their scrolls. The scribes have closed their ink pots. The city's perfumes cinnamon, myrrh, and blue lotus hang softly in the air. But the room where Cleopatra lies awake has its scent, a warm, sweet smell. Almond, rose, and milk. You are now inside her private quarters. No historians are allowed. Here, no Roman envoys, no war generals. Only Cleopatra and her women. The walls are decorated with symbols you cannot understand. Golden shapes of serpents, suns, and closed lotus buds. They whisper of ancient magic. Oil lamps flicker gently, making the gold walls appear to move. The milk is prepared by silent hands, always silent. Cleopatra does not allow talking at this moment. Her women know better than to break the ritual with words. A basin made of rose quartz is filled with warm donkey milk, mixed with crushed pearl, honey, and drops of red rose oil. The surface shimmers like moonlight. Cleopatra's skin is already shining, soft from nightly repetition. She believes the milk softens the skin, not just for beauty, but for memory, for release, for the washing away of betrayal. She lets the milk run over her arms, her shoulders, her neck, her thighs. It is not rushed. Every movement is slow, rhythmic, a kind of meditation. She knows that sleep is not only about closing the eyes. Sleep is about preparing the spirit to leave the body for a while, to drift into the other world where dreams live. And Cleopatra's dreams are not always gentle. Sometimes she dreams of Caesar, sometimes of Antony, sometimes of death. She believes the milk shields her, creates a boundary between her mind and the ghosts that visit her in sleep. Her servants pour the milk over her back. It runs in soft rivers down her spine. In the corners of the room, there are small statues figures of Hathor and Isis, goddesses of fertility and rebirth. Cleopatra whispers their names under her breath, but no one hears her. This is a private moment between her skin, her mind, and something older than time. Some scholars say Cleopatra bathed in donkey milk for beauty. But beauty was not her only goal. She wanted something more. She wanted to freeze time, to hold back the fading of her power, to trick the universe into letting her stay young, just one more night and one more night again. Every evening, this was her secret ritual. No scroll recorded it fully. No Roman ambassador was allowed to know the details. But whispers survived. And those whispers say that Cleopatra believed donkey milk held secret properties, things alchemists could not explain. The milk of a donkey, she said, was sacred. Donkeys were humble animals, close to the earth, neither too wild nor too tame. Their milk was pure, untouched by the ambitions of kings or the greed of merchants. Cleopatra chose it for that reason. She believed it carried the essence of simplicity, something she would never have. Her life was complicated. Her nights were not peaceful, but in this milk, she found a softness the world refused to give her. Some nights, she added strange ingredients to the bath. Crushed violets, ground sandalwood, even tiny bits of meteorite dust bought secretly from desert traders who claimed the stones had fallen from the sky. Cleopatra believed these elements changed the milk into a potion that worked not only on skin, but on time itself. Each night, the milk bath was different. Sometimes sweeter, sometimes sharper, depending on her mood, her fears, and her plans. But there was always one thing in common: silence. No one spoke. No one dared break the spell. The palace outside continued its life servants preparing meals, guards watching the gates, musicians practicing soft melodies for the next banquet. But in this chamber, there was only the sound of milk dripping softly back into the basin. Cleopatra closed her eyes. She imagined the milk carrying away the dust of the day, the negotiations, the betrayals, the lies she had told, the lies told to her. She wanted the milk to erase these things from her skin, to give her a clean surface for the night. The ancient Egyptians believed the skin was not just flesh. It was a barrier between the soul and the world. If you kept it pure, you kept the soul safe. Cleopatra had read the scrolls. She had spoken to the priests of Isis. She had listened to their warnings. Power comes with a price, and that price is the erosion of the self. Each day she ruled, a little piece of her faded. But perhaps the milk could stop that, at least for a while. Some say Cleopatra was obsessed with death, but perhaps it was life she feared more. The slow fading. The wrinkles, yes, but also the softening of ambition, the loss of control. In this ritual, she found a way to resist it. And there was something else, something even stranger. There were nights when Cleopatra did not bathe alone. Sometimes she asked a guest to join her, not a lover, not a general, but a priestess or a philosopher, someone she trusted. Together, they would sit in the milk, their bodies covered in the white sheen of donkey milk and rose oil, and they would speak not aloud, but silently, through looks and shared breath. They would think about immortality, about time, about whether milk could trap the soul, hold it softly like a sleeping child. Some said Cleopatra believed the milk bath was not just about beauty or sleep. It was a portal, a way to slip between worlds, to dream not just ordinary dreams, but to enter the secret space where time folds, where memory becomes water, and the future can be touched. But there's something even stranger. There was a night, one specific night, when Cleopatra added something new to the milk, something that no historian has fully explained. And what happened after that was more bizarre than any beauty ritual. In history, the night Cleopatra changed the milk was not an ordinary night. The air outside the palace was heavy, thicker than usual, as if the Nile itself held its breath. Alexandria's streets, usually filled with soft sounds of merchants closing their stalls, were silent. Even the temple bells, which rang faintly at dusk, had not sounded. In her chamber, Cleopatra stood beside the rose quartz basin, her hand hovering above the milk. That night, she added something new, an ingredient that made her servants glance at each other without speaking. In the milk, Cleopatra sprinkled a powder no one had seen before. Not pearl, not rose, not gold dust. It was black, almost like ash, but when it touched the milk, it dissolved and left no trace. What was it? Some say it was ground lapis lazuli, stolen from a priest's private collection. Others say it was something stranger, a powder made from a scroll burned in the library of Alexandria. A scroll that was not supposed to exist. This scroll, according to whispers, contained forbidden knowledge, an ancient Egyptian spell, not for beauty, but for memory manipulation. The idea was simple and terrifying: to erase certain parts of memory while keeping others clear. Cleopatra, on this night, did not want to forget her lovers or her politics. She wanted to forget her fears. Fear of death, fear of losing control, fear of Rome's growing shadow. By bathing in this altered milk, she hoped to wash away the thoughts that kept her awake. Imagine her standing there, her skin bare, her body illuminated by flickering oil lamps, her back straight, her gaze steady. Her servants, though silent, trembled slightly. They did not know what she had put into the milk. They did not ask. In Egypt, to ask a queen about magic was dangerous. Cleopatra stepped into the basin. The milk rose around her ankles, and her calves, her thighs, her hips. Slowly, she knelt until the liquid covered her shoulders. Her breath slowed. The milk, usually soft and floral, now had a strange smell, something like burnt parchment mixed with honey. Her eyes closed, and in the darkness behind her eyelids, she saw shapes moving. Lines, symbols, not words she understood, but patterns of light and shadow. She let herself sink deeper into the milk, until only her face remained above the surface. The milk clung to her skin like a second layer. Her thoughts began to slow. One by one, the memories she hated slipped away, the image of Caesar leaving Rome and never returning. The moment Antony promised to win but failed, the feeling of power slipping like sand through her fingers. These thoughts faded. They dissolved into the milk like the black powder had. But something else happened. Something Cleopatra had not expected. As she erased her fears, other visions appeared, strange ones. She saw herself not as a queen, but as a girl barefoot, running along the Nile, laughing at the wind. She saw moments she had forgotten. Her mother's voice singing softly, a bracelet she lost as a child, the smell of papyrus in the palace library before she knew what war meant. These memories made her chest tighten. For a moment, she almost pulled herself out of the milk, but she stayed. Her breathing slowed further. Her heart, which usually raced with plans and strategies, beat softly, like a bird sleeping. Outside the chamber, the guards shifted uneasily. They heard nothing from inside, and that was unusual. Normally, after the milk bath, Cleopatra would call for scented towels, for wine, for quiet music. But tonight, there was only silence. The queen was not asleep, but not awake either. She was floating in something between. In her mind, she wandered through corridors that did not exist in her palace. Hallways made of stars, rooms made of mist. She saw reflections of herself in pools of silver water, but each reflection was different. In one, she was old. In another, young. In one, she was a goddess. In another, a shadow. Time became soft. The milk held her in this liminal space where years had no meaning. She felt her skin tingling, not from the milk's softness, but from something else, the strange powder working through her pores, reaching into her mind. She whispered a word, but no one heard it. Not her servants, not the guards, not even the gods she prayed to. It was a word in a forgotten language, one she had read once in a secret scroll. Some say it was the name of an ancient Egyptian star goddess. Others believe it was simply the word for silence. Whatever it was, when she spoke it, the milk rippled slightly. The rose petals on the surface spun in small circles. Her fingers, submerged beneath the surface, flexed softly, as if tracing invisible symbols in the liquid. Cleopatra had always known beauty was a kind of power. But tonight, she realized beauty was also a doorway, a way to enter places no general could conquer, no philosopher could explain. She thought of her ancestors. The pharaohs were buried in golden tombs beneath dunes. The priests who whispered spells while the pyramids still gleamed white in the sun. She wondered if they had also known this ritual, not with donkey milk, but with oils, with minerals, with whispered incantations. Perhaps she was not the first. Perhaps she was just continuing. A practice older than history. Her breath deepened. The milk became warmer, or perhaps it was her body changing temperature. Her skin was no longer separate from the liquid. She imagined her cells absorbing the milk, becoming part of it. The boundary between her body and the bath blurred. This was what she wanted. Not just to cleanse the skin, but to dissolve the self. To stop being Cleopatra, ruler of Egypt, and become something softer. Something without borders. Outside, the moon shifted. A cloud passed, and the chamber grew darker. Her servants lit more lamps, but the shadows only grew longer. They did not know whether to be afraid. Cleopatra's eyes remained closed, but her lips moved. She was not speaking in Greek, nor in Egyptian, but in a language no one recognized. Perhaps it was just a dream language, the kind we all speak when half asleep. Or perhaps it was older than dreams. Her mind wandered further. She saw visions of other queens, other women, in other places, distant lands, different times. Women brushing their hair in moonlight. Women staring into dark pools of water. Women making choices they could not undo. Cleopatra felt connected to them, as if through the milk she had slipped into a shared memory of all women who ever lived. The milk became a mirror, not of her face, but of her soul. And in that mirror, she saw something unexpected. She saw the end of her own story, the snake, the bite, the legend. She saw herself dying, but instead of fear, she felt calm. Because at this moment, inside the milk, she realized something. Death was not the opposite of beauty. It was part of it. The final ritual, the last adornment. She smiled slightly, her lips parting just enough to let the milk touch her tongue. It tasted sweet. She whispered again, this time a promise to herself. A promise to keep the ritual secret. To let history remember her for love affairs and wars, but not for this, the soft dissolving of time in a basin of milk. No one would ever know, or so she thought. But there was a witness that night, someone who saw what Cleopatra did in secret. And what that person did next would change everything. The witness who saw Cleopatra's secret was not meant to be there. Her name was Nysa, a servant girl, younger than the others, no older than 16. She was new to the palace, brought from a village beyond the Nile Delta, her skin still sun-dark from working in date fields. She had been told not to enter the queen's private chamber during the milk ritual. That rule was absolute. But fate does not always respect rules. That night, Nysa had been tasked with preparing fresh linens in the adjoining room. The heavy curtains between her and the queen fluttered slightly, just once, when a breeze came through the open window. It was only for a moment, but it was enough. Nysa looked through the gap. She should have looked away, but she didn't. And what she saw that night stayed with her until the end of her life. She saw Cleopatra submerged in milk, her skin pale. Under the candlelight, her eyes closed, her lips moving in strange, silent words. But Nysa also saw something else, something no one ever wrote down. The milk in the basin was changing. It no longer looked like milk. It shimmered with a faint blue light, like moonlit silk underwater. The rose petals floated as if on a different current, spinning slowly in small circles that did not match the motion of the queen's breath or the air in the room. Nysa's heart beat fast. She wanted to call the other servants, but her mouth stayed shut as if glued by an invisible force. Her eyes could not look away. In the milk, she saw reflections that should not have been there. Not just Cleopatra's face, but other faces. flickering quickly. Faces of women Nysa had never seen. Some wore golden crowns, others simple veils. Some wept, some smiled, some stared directly at Nysa through the milk. It was like looking into another world. Nysa's legs trembled, but she stayed hidden. The queen whispered something in a language no one knew, and then Nysa saw Cleopatra raise her right hand, dripping with milk, and trace a symbol in the air. A symbol that glowed for a moment, before fading. It was a spiral, but not just any spiral. It moved backward in reverse, as if time itself was uncoiling. Nysa's breath caught in her throat. She had seen symbols like that before, carved on old stones in her village, near tombs no one dared to disturb. Her grandmother had warned her. Spirals are not decorations. They are keys. They unlock things best left closed. But Cleopatra did not hesitate. She whispered again, and the milk rippled. Nysa felt the air in the room shift, heavier, like the atmosphere before a storm. Cleopatra's body relaxed further, almost floating. Her lips parted slightly, but no sound came out anymore. Her breath slowed, her chest rising and falling so softly it was hard to tell if she was still awake or still alive. Nysa stepped, back, heart pounding. She should have left, but she didn't. She watched as Cleopatra opened her eyes, and for a moment, those eyes were not Cleopatra's. They were the eyes of something older, something vast. Nysa could not describe it later. She tried to tell herself it was just a trick of the light, but she knew better. The queen was looking at something beyond the room, beyond Egypt, beyond even time itself. Then came the most terrifying part. Cleopatra spoke directly to Nysa, without moving her lips. The girl heard the queen's voice inside her head. The words were clear, soft as silk, but sharp as ice. You saw too much. The voice was not angry. It was simply stating a fact. Nysa fell to her knees, shaking. Tears ran down her face, but she could not stop them. Her hands clutched the linens she was holding, but they felt distant, like they belonged to someone else. The queen's eyes closed again, and the light in the milk dimmed. The spirals faded. The rose petals stopped moving. For a moment, everything was still. Then Cleopatra rose slowly from the bath. The milk clung to her skin like a second skin, glistening under the oil lamps. Her servants came forward, wrapping her in soft cloths, their hands steady, their faces expressionless. They had done this every night for years, but tonight was different. They did not know why. Only Nysa knew. Cleopatra's gaze did not fall on Nysa again, but the girl felt marked, as if a symbol had been drawn on her soul. That night, when the queen lay down on her ivory bed, she slept deeply, her face calm. Her breathing was soft, her hands resting gently on her stomach. Outside, Alexandria's harbor flickered with the last of the lanterns. The ship swayed gently in the water. But inside the queen's chambers, something had changed. The milk had been poured away down a silver drain that led to the palace gardens, where it would soak into the earth. But the magic it carried remained. In the days that followed, Cleopatra's skin seemed to glow differently. Not just soft, but luminous, as if lit from within. Her counselors noticed. Her lovers noticed, but no one spoke of it. They thought it was beautiful. They did not realize it was something else. Nysa, however, could not forget. She dreamed of the milk every night, the blue light, the spiral, the faces in the liquid. She dreamed of Cleopatra's eyes and of the voice in her mind. The queen had said, "You saw too much." And she was right. He was right. Because now Nysa carried a secret no one else knew. The queen's ritual was not just about preserving beauty. It was about touching the edge of life and death, of memory and forgetting, of time and silence. And Nysa would soon discover that keeping this secret came at a price. In the weeks that followed, Nysa found herself waking at odd hours, hearing whispers in her dreams. She would wake with the taste of milk on her tongue, though she had eaten nothing. She would smell roses and honey where there was none. Sometimes, when she looked into water basins to wash her face, she saw reflections that were not her own. She saw glimpses of Cleopatra, yes, but also other women, queens from long ago, priestesses, shadows. Some nights, she woke with a single word echoing in her mind, the same word Cleopatra had whispered in the milk. A word in a language no one spoke anymore. Nysa tried to forget, but forgetting is not easy when the body remembers. Her skin tingled as if coated in milk, even when dry. Her dreams were no longer her own. One night, weeks after the ritual, Cleopatra summoned Nysa privately. The girl's heart raced. She expected punishment. Instead, the queen smiled gently and spoke in a voice soft enough to lull the Nile itself. "You are not in trouble, little one. You are chosen." Nysa did not understand. The queen explained slowly, her eyes shining. Every queen needs a keeper of memory, someone to hold the secrets, to carry the weight of what cannot be said aloud. You are that person now. Cleopatra reached out and touched Nysa's forehead with a finger dipped in milk. The touch burned cold, then warm. Nysa's knees buckled. She wanted to run, but stayed still. The queen whispered, "From now on, you will see things others do not. You will remember what others forget. This is a gift and a burden. Do not fear it." That night, Nysa slept in the palace garden, near the drain where the milk had flowed. She dreamed of rivers running backward, of stars falling into bowls of liquid silver, of the queen bathing again, but this time not in milk in something darker, something deeper. She awoke at dawn, covered in dew, her heart soft but heavy. From that day on, she never told anyone what she had seen, but she carried the memory like a second skin, just as the milk had clung to Cleopatra. And though the queen's beauty remained legendary, history never recorded this part of the story, the secret passing of knowledge from queen to servant, the quiet creation of a keeper of memory. But Nysa knew, and she also knew that this was only the beginning, because soon Cleopatra's rituals would grow stranger, and the consequences would ripple far beyond her chambers, changing the course of history in ways no one expected. Have you ever wondered what happens when a secret ritual becomes too powerful to contain? Cleopatra's milk bath was never meant to be shared. It was supposed to remain between her silent servants, and the gods she whispered to in the dark. But once Nysa became the keeper of memory, the boundary between the ritual and the world outside began to shift. The queen's nightly baths became deeper, stranger, and more dangerous. Imagine the nights that followed. The palace seemed the same from the outside columns gleaming under the moon, guards standing motionless at the gates, musicians playing soft melodies in distant halls. But inside Cleopatra's chamber, the milk was changing. It was no longer just donkey milk mixed with rose oil and honey. The queen began to add other things that no one dared question. One night, she dissolved crushed turquoise stones into the milk. Another night, she stirred in ink scraped from ancient scrolls. And then came the night when she added something even rarer, drops of her blood. Just a few, but enough to change the color of the milk from white to a faint pearly pink. Her servants watched with lowered eyes, hands trembling slightly as they poured the milk over her shoulders. Cleopatra said nothing. Her lips moved silently, forming words no one else could hear. The ritual had shifted from beauty to something else, a communication, perhaps, or a negotiation with forces beyond human understanding. Each night, Cleopatra went deeper into this practice. Each night, Nysa watched, her heart a mix of awe and fear. She understood now that the milk was not just for Cleopatra's skin. It was a portal, a medium between the queen and the unknown. The queen no longer just whispered prayers. She listened. And sometimes she answered voices no one else could hear. One evening, as the servants prepared the bath, Cleopatra asked for something new. She ordered Nysa to collect 7 blue lotus flowers from the temple gardens. Not 6, not 8, 7 exactly. Nysa obeyed. The flowers were sacred, known for their calming fragrance and strange effects on the mind. When soaked in warm milk, they released a scent that blurred the line between waking and dreaming. Cleopatra placed the petals on the surface of the milk, watching them float in careful circles. Then she stepped into the bath, letting the petals brush against her skin. Her eyes closed, her breath slowed, and she whispered the same spiral word that Nysa had heard before. The milk rippled, the petals spun faster. In the stillness of the room, something happened that no one could explain. The walls seemed to bend slightly, as if the air itself were folding. The gold patterns on the ceiling shifted, their shapes no longer static. A serpent that had always curled to the left now curled to the right. A lotus that pointed upward now pointed down. The room remained silent, but the silence had a texture, thick like honey. Cleopatra's body relaxed completely, floating in the milk, her hair spreading around her like dark silk. In her mind, she was no longer in Alexandria. She was in a place without geography, a space made of memory and sound. She heard the voices of her ancestors, speaking not in words, but in pulses of warmth and cold. She saw the faces of queens before her, women who had ruled lands now swallowed by sand. They were not angry. They were not kind. They simply watched. Her eyes steady, waiting to see what she would do next. In this milk bath, Cleopatra realized she could ask questions no oracle could answer. She asked silently, "How do I keep my power? How do I stop Rome? How do I hold on to my soul when the world wants to carve pieces from it?" The answers came not in sentences, but in images. She saw a serpent biting its tail. She saw a river flowing backward. She saw her face, aging and unaging at the same time. The milk around her shimmered, the surface shifting like the Nile under moonlight. Her body felt light, almost dissolving into the liquid. She thought of Nysa, standing silently near the curtain, watching. Cleopatra smiled softly, knowing the girl would carry this knowledge long after the queen was gone. And then came the next layer of the ritual, the part Cleopatra had never shared with anyone, not even Nysa. In the deepest moments of her milk baths, Cleopatra believed she could move between possibilities. She could see not just one future, but many. She saw herself ruling Egypt for 50 more years. She saw herself dying tomorrow. She saw Rome crumbling. She saw Rome thriving. She saw a world where her name was forgotten, and another where her legend grew like wildfire. All these futures floated around her in the milk, and she chose carefully which ones to lean toward. Some nights, she whispered to the milk, "Let me stay beautiful. Let me keep their eyes on me." Other nights, she whispered, "Let me disappear quietly, leaving only mystery." The milk held her words like secrets, dissolving them softly into its warmth. But the ritual was not without danger. One night, Cleopatra stayed in the milk too long. Her servants grew nervous. Her skin became so pallid that they thought she had died. Nysa reached out to touch her shoulder, but the queen's eyes snapped open. Her pupils were wide, almost black, reflecting not the room, but something else, something distant. Nysa froze. Cleopatra whispered, "I went too far tonight. I saw things I should not have seen." Her voice was calm, but her fingers trembled slightly as she rose from the bath. The servants wrapped her in linen, but the queen's mind was still in that other place. That night, she did not sleep on her usual bed. She lay instead on the floor, near the basin, her head resting on a folded cloth. She whispered to the stone beneath her, "I am not afraid." But she was. The next day, Cleopatra ordered all mirrors in her chambers to be covered. She said nothing to her court, but Nysa understood. The queen had seen reflections in the milk that no mirror could contain. She did not want to see them again by accident. Days passed. The ritual continued, but with new rules. Cleopatra now bathed alone, asking even Nysa to wait outside the room. Only after the bath would she call her back, her skin damp, her eyes heavy with something between sleep and waking. Nysa noticed the queen's mood shifting. Sometimes Cleopatra would laugh softly at nothing, her gaze distant. Other times, she would cry without tears, her face calm, but her hands shaking slightly. Her counselors thought she was stressed. They blamed Rome, politics, and betrayal. But Nysa knew better. The milk was changing the queen. Or perhaps Cleopatra was changing the milk. The line between them was no longer clear. One night, Cleopatra called Nysa close and whispered anew, "Secret, I have learned how to speak to the past and to the future. But they do not always speak back in kind." Nysa did not understand fully, but she nodded, her heart soft, her breathing slow. Cleopatra continued, "The milk is not just for my skin. It is for the moments between heartbeats, where time softens. I go there every night now, and sometimes I do not wish to return." Her eyes shimmered, not with tears, but with something older like starlight trapped in water. That night, after Cleopatra's bath, Nysa noticed something strange in the basin. The milk, usually poured away by servants, was left to cool. Nysa looked closely. On the surface of the milk floated symbols, not drawn by human hands, but formed naturally, as if the milk itself had remembered the queen's whispers. Spirals, eyes, lotus flowers, tiny suns. They faded quickly as the milk cooled, but Nysa saw them. She closed her eyes, her breath slowing. She wondered, could she step into the milk herself? Would she see what Cleopatra saw? She did not dare, but the thought stayed with her, and it would not leave. In the days that followed, the queen's rituals became the quiet center of the palace, even though no one spoke of them. Rome sent envoys. Political decisions were made. But in the heart of Alexandria, in the silent nights, Cleopatra continued her baths, floating between worlds. Nysa remained by her side, holding the memories no one else wanted. And as the queen drifted further into the milk's mysteries, a question formed in Nysa's mind, a question she could not shake. What would happen if the queen one night did not return from the milk? What if she chose to stay in that soft, dissolving place between dreams and death? And more frightening still, what if that was exactly what she was planning? Have you ever wondered what it feels like to prepare for sleep, knowing you might never wake as the same person again? That was the space Cleopatra now lived in. Each night before her milk ritual, she looked at the rose quartz basin not as a luxury, but as a door she was choosing to open. And each time she stepped into it, she knew the world on the other side was less and less familiar. The palace continued its usual rhythms. Servants carried trays of pomegranates and figs. Advisors whispered about Roman threats. Musicians tuned their lyres for the next banquet. But at the heart of it all, Cleopatra's private chamber became a different kind of place of space where time softened, where milk shimmered with secrets. Nysa remained silent, her role as memory keeper growing heavier with each passing day. She watched as the queen's rituals grew more complex, more layered, and more dangerous. Cleopatra no longer used just donkey milk. She began to mix in other substances, crushed moonstones said to have fallen from the sky, fragments of myrrh collected from distant temples, and oils pressed from plants that only bloomed once every 7 years. One night, she added powdered ambergris, something sailors called the tears of whales. harvested from the ocean's secret places. The scent filled the chamber, blending with the rose and honey until it was hard to tell where one smell ended and the other began. Cleopatra believed each new ingredient shifted the milk's power. It was no longer about youth or beauty. It was about thinning the veil between this world and the next. As she stepped into the bath, her breath became slower, softer. Her eyes half closed, not in sleep but in surrender. Nysa noticed a pattern. The queen's milk rituals always began with a question whispered into the liquid. Sometimes the question was simple. What will tomorrow bring? Sometimes it was more profound. Am I still myself? But on this night, Cleopatra asked something different. Her voice was barely audible, but Nysa, standing just beyond the curtain, heard it clearly in her mind. What happens when the boundary breaks? The milk rippled gently as if answering. Cleopatra submerged herself completely, only her face above the surface. The milk clung to her like silk, the added powders making it shimmer under the oil lamps. Her lips moved silently, tracing the spiral word again and again. And then something strange happened. The room grew colder, though the milk remained warm. The gold patterns on the walls seemed to shift once more, bending and flexing like living things. Cleopatra's breath slowed further, so soft it was almost invisible. Nysa watched as the queen's skin changed under the milk, not in color, but in texture. It no longer looked like human skin. It gleamed like polished alabaster, smooth, almost translucent. Nysa held her breath, unsure whether to call for help or stay silent. But before she could decide, Cleopatra opened her eyes. They reflected not the room, but something beyond. Stars, water, ancient sands long forgotten by the living. Her voice came softly, not with her lips, but inside Nysa's mind again. Do you see it now? Nysa's knees weakened, but she stayed standing. The milk rippled again, and for a moment, Nysa thought she saw the queen's reflection split into two one-halves smiling, the other half dissolving into mist. The petals on the surface of the milk spun faster, caught in currents no one else could see. And then came the moment no one could have predicted. Cleopatra began to lift her hand out of the milk, but instead of droplets falling from her skin, the liquid clung to her, rising with her hand in thin, silken threads, like spider silk stretched between her fingers. The milk did not want to let go. It held onto her as if alive. Cleopatra whispered again, "It's happening. The milk has learned me." Nysa did not understand, but the words made her heart race. The queen smiled softly, eyes calm. The milk remembers now. It has a memory of me. It knows my shape, my thoughts, my voice. I am no longer bathing in milk. I am bathing in myself. Nysa felt a chill that had nothing to do with the room's temperature. She realized the queen had crossed a line. This was no longer a ritual. It was a transformation. Cleopatra stood slowly, the milk sliding down her body like liquid glass. Her skin shone in the lamplight, luminous but not entirely human. She looked at Nysa, eyes soft but unblinking. "You must understand, little one. The body is not just flesh. It is memory made solid. And now I have dissolved that memory into the milk. Each night, I pour myself back in. Each night, I become more fluid, more soft, more eternal." Nysa swallowed hard, her throat dry. She wanted to speak, but no words came. Cleopatra wrapped herself in linen, her movements graceful, almost floating. Her breath remained slow, her voice a whisper. Rome cannot conquer this. They can conquer lands, take armies, and burn scrolls. But they cannot conquer milk. They cannot conquer softness. They cannot conquer forgetting. Her lips curved into a smile that was both kind and terrifying. Nysa thought of the milk flowing through the palace, drains into the gardens, seeping into the soil. What would grow from it? Would the earth remember the queen, too? In the nights that followed, the milk baths continued, but something shifted. Cleopatra no longer needed to speak her questions aloud. The milk answered before she asked. It shimmered and swirled, forming symbols that appeared briefly, then vanished. The spiral, the eye, the serpent, the flower. Nysa wondered if the milk dreamed now, just as the queen did. One night, Cleopatra confessed something even stranger. When I close my eyes in the bath, I no longer dream of Egypt. I dream of other places, other lives, other versions of myself. Nysa listened quietly, her heart beating slowly. Cleopatra continued, her voice soft. I have seen myself as a child, again running through papyrus fields. I have seen myself as an old woman, sitting quietly in a garden no longer here. I have seen myself as nothing but mist over the Nile, and I have seen myself as something else human, not queen, but part of the water itself. Nysa felt the weight of these words press into her chest like warm stone. She wanted to ask what the queen meant, but she knew better. Some knowledge is too soft, too strange, to speak aloud. The next night, the ritual changed again. Cleopatra added another new element to the milk, a single hair from her head, tied into a knot, and dropped into the liquid. As it sank, she whispered, "Now it is complete. I have given the milk my image, my voice, my scent, and now my strand of life. The milk knows me fully. The milk reminds me better than history ever will." Nysa watched in silence, her eyes wide. The queen stepped into the bath, letting the liquid embrace her. The milk clung tighter now, as if greeting an old friend. Cleopatra's body became still, her breath so soft it was like the hush between two heartbeats. In her mind, she floated. She saw the world not as a queen, but as a pattern of spirals and soft dissolves. She saw rivers folding into clouds. She saw stars hiding in petals. She saw her name written in liquid, then fading gently, replaced by nothingness. And in that nothingness, she felt peace. Nysa sat quietly, knowing she was witnessing something no other human would ever understand. The queen was not just bathing in milk. She was becoming it, becoming part of something older than pyramids, softer than silk, quieter than time. The milk carried her memory now, her voice, her story. And Nysa, the keeper of memory, understood her new role, to make sure no one ever forgot this, even if they never truly understood it. But there was one more thing Cleopatra whispered, just before sleep took her that night, a sentence that echoed softly in the room, too soft for anyone else to hear but Nysa. One day, I will not return from the milk. One day, I will choose to stay dissolved. And when that happens, you will know. Nysa closed her eyes, her breath steady. She imagined the queen floating forever in the soft white liquid, her body and memory mingling with the milk, becoming part of the world in a way no conqueror could undo. And as the oil lamps flickered lower, the room softened into silence, holding this strange, gentle secret. Have you ever wondered what happens when a person becomes part of something they once controlled? Cleopatra had always believed she ruled. Her rituals. She chose the milk, the ingredients, and the timing. But now the milk seemed to move on its own, remembering her before she whispered, responding to her breath before she spoke. It had become an extension of her, or perhaps she had become an extension of it. The nights in the palace grew quieter as this transformation deepened. The outer world remained unchanged. Guards walked their rounds, scribes copied documents, and Roman diplomats waited impatiently for audiences with the queen. But inside Cleopatra's private chamber, the boundary between human and liquid, between ritual and reality, dissolved further. Nysa, the memory keeper, watched silently. She had learned not to ask questions. Her role was not to interfere, but to witness. And so she stood in the corner, her eyes soft, her heart steady, while Cleopatra prepared the bath again. This time, the milk was different. It had taken on a faint shimmer, like morning mist over the Nile. It smelled of rose and honey, yes, but also of something else, something harder to define. A scent like the edge of sleep, or the air before a dream starts. Cleopatra stepped into the bath slowly, her skin glowing softly in the lamplight. The milk embraced her like an old friend, wrapping her body in warmth. Her lips moved, but Nysa could not hear the words aloud. Yet still, the whispers reached her, threading through her thoughts like silk ribbons. "Tonight," the queen said, "I will go deeper." Nysa's breath slowed, her body becoming soft, her mind open but calm. She watched as the queen sank lower into the milk, her body still, her breathing so gentle it was barely visible. The petals on the surface of the milk began to spin again, just as they had on previous nights. But this time, they did not spin alone. New shapes formed in the milk circles within circles, spirals folding into each other, small waves that reflected patterns older than any scroll. Cleopatra's eyes fluttered closed, and in her mind, she drifted away from the palace. She floated through layers of memory, past the familiar stories of Egypt, past the wars and alliances, past the names of kings and generals. She floated into something older, a space of soft dissolving, where her body no longer mattered. She became part of the milk, part of the air, part of the gentle hum that exists beneath all things. And there, in that space, she discovered something new. She realized that memory itself was soft, like milk. It could be stirred, warmed, changed. It could hold secrets or release them, depending on how it was touched. Cleopatra had always believed in control. But here, in this milk dream, she let go. She let the liquid remind her of her better than history would. She whispered to it, "Take my fears, take my ambitions, take my sorrow, leave only softness, leave only calm." The milk shimmered, responding not with words, but with warmth. Outside the bath, Nysa noticed something strange. Her breath began to match the queen's, slow and steady. Her mind drifted gently, as if she, too, were entering the milk without stepping into it. Her eyes softened, and in the patterns on the milk's surface, she saw reflections, not just of Cleopatra, but of herself. She saw herself as an old woman, telling the story to no one. She saw herself as a child again, running through fields before she was brought to the palace. She saw herself standing in the future, alone, holding the queen's memory like a fragile vase. And she understood. The ritual was no longer just Cleopatra's. It had extended to Nysa now, wrapping her in its quiet embrace. The queen floated deeper, her body soft, her thoughts fluid. She whispered again, "The milk has no history books. It holds no grudges. It simply remembers what is given to it, and lets it fade gently." She thought of Rome, of Caesar and Antony, of the battles she had fought not with armies, but with beauty and wit. She thought of the scrolls burned in Alexandria, of the lost knowledge. And then she realized none of that mattered here. In the milk, there was no empire, no politics, no loss. There was only the soft, now the gentle present, unfolding quietly. Cleopatra's mind reached further. She imagined the milk seeping into the ground, into rivers, into clouds. She imagined future women, centuries from now, who would never know her name, but would still inherit this softness. Women brushing there, skin gently at night, whispering to mirrors, wondering about beauty rituals without knowing where they came from. And milk would remember, even if the world did not. Nysa watched as the queen's body became stiller, her breath slower. She wondered if Cleopatra was leaving for good this time, choosing not to return from the milk's embrace. But then, the Queen's eyes opened slowly, calm and clear. Her voice whispered directly into Nysa's thoughts again. Not yet. There is one more thing I must do. Nysa's heart softened. She listened quietly, her body relaxed, her mind open. Cleopatra whispered, I must teach the milk to hold not just memory, but forgiveness. Nysa did not understand at first, but then she realized the queen was not just erasing fears and pain. She was dissolving grudges, regrets, the sharpness of the past. She was teaching the milk to let go, to soften not only skin, but time itself. The next night, Cleopatra added something new to the bath, a single olive leaf, symbol of peace. She crushed it gently between her fingers before dropping it into the milk. As it floated, she whispered, Let this soften the sharp edges. Let this teach the milk to forgive. The milk rippled softly, as if understanding. Cleopatra closed her eyes and sank deeper, letting the liquid cover her completely for a moment. Nysa held her breath, waiting. When the queen rose again, her face was calm, her eyes soft. She whispered, The ritual is complete. The milk knows how to forgive now. Nysa felt a tear slip down her cheek, though she did not feel sad. It was a tear of release, of softness, of letting go. In the days that followed, Cleopatra's court continued as usual. Visitors came and went. Political decisions were made. But at night, the queen and Nysa returned to the bath, to the soft, dissolving place where the world's sharpness faded. Cleopatra no longer worried about Rome. She no longer worried about legacy. She trusted the milk now. It would carry her story in its way, through rivers, through soil, through whispers in the minds of women who would never know her name, but would still feel her softness. Nysa understood her role completely now. She was not just a servant. She was a vessel for this memory, a keeper of the queen's most gentle secret. And she knew that when Cleopatra finally chose not to return from the milk, she would be ready to hold that story softly, without fear. The milk had taught her that. And as the queen closed her eyes each night, sinking into the warm, shimmering liquid, both women shared a calm silence, knowing they had created something softer than history, something that could not be conquered, only remembered in whispers, like a dream just before sleep. Have you ever wondered if there's a moment when ritual stops being a practice and becomes a place you live in? Cleopatra reached that moment quietly. She no longer thought of the milk bath as preparation for sleep, or even as an escape from the world. It had become her second home, a space softer than dreams, where her mind could float without weight. The milk was no longer just liquid. It was memory, atmosphere, and perhaps even consciousness. Each night, the queen slipped into this softness, and each night, she let go of a little more of herself, piece by piece, layer by layer. Alexandria continued as always, the harbor full of ships, the markets humming with quiet trade, the priests lighting incense in cool temple halls. But in Cleopatra's private chamber, the world grew quieter. The milk ritual had expanded beyond beauty, beyond memory, beyond forgiveness. It had become a way of existing. Nysa noticed the change. The queen no longer spoke before the bath. She no longer needed to ask the milk questions. Now, she simply entered it, and the answers came in sensations, in feelings, in images that floated softly through her mind. Nysa remained near the curtain, eyes half closed, breathing in sync with the queens. Her role was clear. She was the witness, the keeper, the one who would remember when Cleopatra chose not to return from the milk. But the queen was not ready yet. Each night she dissolved into the milk, but each morning she came back softer, lighter, but still present. Cleopatra had discovered something in the milk, a way to stretch time. While her body floated in the warm liquid, minutes became hours. Hours became soft loops that folded into each other. She could stay in one moment as long as she wished, turning it over gently in her mind like a pearl in her hand. She revisited memories, not to hold on to them, but to soften them. She replayed moments from her life, not the battles or the speeches or the politics, but the small things. The scent of papyrus scrolls in the library before it burned. The feel of sunlight on her shoulders as a child. The sound of her mother's voice humming a song no one remembered anymore. The milk held these memories without judgment. It did not ask why she returned to them. It simply wrapped them in softness, letting them dissolve slowly until they no longer carried weight. Nysa saw the change in Cleopatra's face. Lines of worry faded. Her eyes, once sharp with calculation, now glowed with calm. Even the Roman envoys noticed but did not understand. They whispered to each other, "The queen is at peace." But they thought it was because she had accepted defeat. They did not realize she had discovered something beyond power, something Rome could never touch. The milk, the softness, the dissolving of sharpness into silk. One night, Cleopatra added something new to the ritual again. She placed a single feather from a heron into the milk. The heron, in ancient Egyptian belief, was the bird of rebirth, the one that rose from the primordial waters at the beginning of time. The feather floated on the milk, casting soft ripples. Cleopatra whispered to it, "Let this night be a beginning, not just an ending." She stepped into the bath, her skin welcoming the milk's embrace. Nysa watched quietly, her breathing slow, her heart calm. The queen's body became still, her breath barely moving. Inside the milk, Cleopatra traveled again, not in space, but in softness. She saw herself in other times, other lives. She saw a version of herself walking along the Nile, barefoot, laughing. She saw another version sitting in silence, reading scrolls that had never burned. She saw herself as a whisper in the air, a reflection in water, a ripple on the surface of time. And she realized something. All versions of herself were soft now. The milk had taught her that. In this place, there were no sharp lines between past and future, between self and other. Everything was gentle, folded into the same warm liquid. Cleopatra whispered again, "Let me stay here, but let me also return." The milk responded with warmth, holding her gently, but not pulling her away from the world completely. It gave her both options, softness now and the choice to come back later. Nysa watched the queen rise from the bath, her skin glowing softly, her eyes calm. The milk slid from her body in ribbons of light, as if reluctant to leave. Cleopatra smiled at Nysa, her lips barely parting. "It is almost time, little one." "But not yet." Nysa nodded, understanding without words. The queen still had something to do before she chose to stay in the milk forever. In the nights that followed, Cleopatra's routine remained the same, but the milk baths became longer. Sometimes she stayed submerged for hours, floating silently, her thoughts dissolving into the liquid. Her servants grew used to this, their movements careful, their faces calm. Nysa noticed they no longer feared the ritual. They had accepted it as part of palace life, like the changing of the guards or the lighting of lamps at dusk. But Nysa knew better. She knew the milk was not just a ritual now, it was a transformation. Cleopatra had begun teaching the milk not just to remember her, but to become her. She whispered to it, "Take my voice, my image, my breath. Carry me softly into the future. Let me be a dream passed from woman to woman, from mother to daughter, from queen to memory." Nysa listened to these whispers, her heart soft. She understood her role completely. When Cleopatra chose not to return, Nysa would carry the story not as history but as softness. She would remember not the wars or the politics, but the gentle dissolving of the queen into milk and time. One night, as the moon hung low over Alexandria, Cleopatra did something new. She asked Nysa to prepare her bed not in the royal chamber, but beside the milk basin. She lay down on soft linens near the bath, her hand resting in the cooled milk. Her eyes closed, her breath slow. She whispered, "Tonight, I will sleep halfway between the worlds. Half in the milk, half in the air." Nysa stayed nearby, watching, her breath soft and steady. In the quiet of that night, the palace faded away. The sounds of the city, the footsteps of guards, the whispers of scribes, all softened into background hums. Cleopatra floated between waking and dreaming, between body and liquid, between self and memory. She saw visions again, but this time they were calmer. She saw women brushing their hair under moonlight, whispering soft prayers into bowls of water. She saw future queens, unknown to her, dipping their hands into fragrant oils without knowing why they did it. She saw herself as part of a tradition that stretched beyond time, women finding softness in a world that wanted them hard. Cleopatra smiled softly in her sleep, her fingers trailing gently in the milk. Nysa watched the queen's chest rise and fall, her face calm. The night passed slowly, each moment stretched into softness. In the early hours off morning, when the sky was still dark, but the air hinted at dawn, Cleopatra whispered something new. Nysa leaned close to hear, her heart quiet, her mind open. The queen said, "When I finally stay in the milk, do not build me a tomb. Do not carve my name in stone. Let me be remembered only in softness. Let me be a memory whispered at night, before sleep, in moments of calm." Nysa nodded silently, tears slipping down her cheeks. Not of sorrow, but of gentle release. She understood completely. The milk would hold the queen's essence better than any monument ever could. And as the lamps flickered low, and the air grew softer, both women drifted into the same quiet space between body and spirit, between history and sleep, between memory and forgetting. The milk shimmered softly, holding the queen's story like a secret, ready to carry it forward in ripples, in whispers, in the gentle dissolving of time. Now, have you ever thought about how a person knows when to let go of the world? Cleopatra had spent her life gripping the edges of power with careful hands, balancing on the thin line between control and collapse. But now, each night in the milk, her fingers loosened just a little more. The need to rule faded softly beneath. Layers of rose oil and warm donkey milk. Power, she realized, was just another illusion sharp in the daylight, but dissolvable at night. Nysa stayed near, her breath calm, her eyes soft, as she watched the queen prepare once again for the nightly ritual. The basin gleamed quietly in the lamplight, the milk ready, shimmering faintly like moon-washed silk. Tonight, the milk was different again. Cleopatra had whispered to it earlier, holding her palm just above the surface, letting her breath disturb the milk's stillness. She had asked it to carry her further, not just into sleep, but into the soft place where she might decide to stay. Nysa felt the weight of this request in her chest, a gentle ache, not painful but present. She knew what it meant. The queen was preparing for a kind of departure, not from life, exactly, but from the need to hold on to it so tightly. Cleopatra stepped into the bath with slow grace, her skin welcoming the warmth. The milk wrapped around her body, familiar. Now, like a second skin or a memory that had always been there. Her lips moved silently, whispering words Nysa could not hear, but still, the meaning came through. "Tonight, I ask for softness without return." Nysa closed her eyes briefly, breathing. In the scent of rose and almond, the faint salt of the queen's tears dissolving invisibly into the milk. She knew the ritual would be longer tonight. The queen's body floated gently, her face calm, her breath barely touching the surface. In her mind, Cleopatra drifted again, not through time this time, but through softness itself. She let go of titles, of alliances, of betrayals. She let go of the sharp moments, the battles, the lovers, the political games. She kept only the gentle things, the feel of silk robes against her skin, the warmth of the sun on her back, the softness of milk sliding across her shoulders. She whispered to the milk, not asking for anything now, but offering something instead, her full self. No more boundaries. No more separation between queen and ritual, between memory and skin. Take me, she whispered. Not my crown, not my name, just me, the soft part beneath all rolls. The milk shimmered slightly, the petals on its surface spinning, gently as if stirred by a breeze that did not exist. Nysa watched silently, knowing she was witnessing the final stages of a slow dissolving. Cleopatra had always controlled her own story, but now she was offering it to something older, something softer. Nysa wondered if the milk would remember this moment better than history would. She imagined future generations reading of Cleopatra as a ruler, a seductress, and a strategist. But they would not know about this, the quiet dissolving of self into warmth, into softness, into something beyond memory. Only Nysa would carry. That, and perhaps the milk. The queen stayed submerged longer than usual, her breath so soft that Nysa wondered if it had stopped. But then Cleopatra's eyes opened slowly, calmly, as if she had drifted to the very edge of sleep and chosen to return just one more time. Her gaze met Nysa's, not with command, but with trust. The queen whispered, her voice threading directly into Nysa's mind again. The milk has taught me that endings are not sharp. They are soft. They fold into the next moment like silk. Nysa felt her chest loosen, her heart steady. She nodded, knowing the queen did not need an answer. Cleopatra continued, her breath warm against the surface of the milk. I no longer fear Rome. I no longer fear time. The milk has shown me that even names dissolve, and that is a kind of freedom. Nysa let her eyes soften. She understood. The queen did not need to be remembered as a ruler or a lover or a legend. She needed to be remembered as softness itself. The ritual continued, night after night, each bath longer than the last. Cleopatra added new elements to the milk sometimes. A single drop of rainwater collected from the palace roof, sometimes a strand of linen cloth from her childhood, sometimes the ash of a burnt letter she had once written but never sent. Each addition made the milk more alive, more memory-rich, more part of the queen herself. Nysa saw it happen slowly. Cleopatra's body became lighter, her steps softer, her gaze distant but calm. She spoke less in the daytime, smiled more gently, and let go of anger when it came, releasing it like steam from warm tea. She no longer argued with advisors. She no longer worried about Roman politics. She drifted through the palace like a soft breeze, leaving calm in her wake. At night, the milk became her world. The basin was no longer just a ritual object. It was a place, a space, a home. Cleopatra would sink into it, her body dissolving into warmth, her breath sinking with the soft ripples of the liquid. Nysa watched each night, knowing the queen was practicing for something final, not death. Exactly, but a return to softness so complete that it would leave no sharp edge behind. One night, Cleopatra spoke aloud before entering the milk, her voice soft but clear. Tonight, I will practice my final bath, but I will return just once more to tell you the last part. Nysa understood. She prepared the room carefully, lighting the lamps so their flames were low, wrapping the queen in silk before she entered the bath. The milk gleamed softly, welcoming the queen's body like an old friend. Cleopatra floated in silence, her breath slow, her heart calm. In her mind, she visited the softest places she had known, The hush of early morning gardens, the feel of warm sand under her feet as a child, the whisper of wind through papyrus reeds. She let go of her name. She let go of her legend. She let go of everything except softness. The milk shimmered gently, holding her body and her memory. Nysa stayed close, her eyes steady, her breath calm. She knew that soon, perhaps very soon, Cleopatra would choose not to return from the milk. But tonight, the queen rose slowly from the bath, her skin glowing softly, her eyes calm. She whispered, "Tomorrow, I will tell you the final part. Then, I will decide." Nysa nodded, her heart soft, her hands steady. She wrapped the queen in linen, helped her to rest beside the basin, and watched her drift into sleep. The milk cooled slowly, its surface still shimmering faintly with memory. Nysa sat quietly through the night, knowing that when morning came, she would hear the last part of the queen's story. And after that, everything would change, not with sharpness, but with softness, like silk folding into silk, like milk swirling into milk, like sleep arriving gently at the edge of waking. Have you ever wondered how it feels to know the last chapter of your life before it happens, and to be at peace with it? Cleopatra knew. On the morning after her longest milk ritual yet, she awoke with calm in her bones. Her breath was slow. Her body felt lighter, not weaker, just softer, as though her muscles were no longer meant for battle, but for floating. Nysa stayed by her side, silent, her role now fully clear. To listen, to remember, to carry forward the story no one else would hear. The queen whispered before the sun rose fully, her voice barely more than breath. "Today, I will tell you the last part." Nysa's hands remained folded in her lap, her eyes soft, her mind quiet. She listened as Cleopatra spoke slowly, her words weaving through the stillness of the room like silk ribbons. "The milk has taught me many things," the queen said. "It has shown me that memory is not fixed, that time is not sharp, and that softness is stronger than stone. But there is one more lesson, the last one." Nysa leaned closer, her heart open, her breath steady. Cleopatra continued, her eyes half closed, her lips moving softly. "The last lesson is this. When you dissolve fully into softness, you do not disappear. You change form. You become part of everything else that is soft, the mist, the breeze, the hush of early morning, the warmth of milk before it cools. You are still here, but no longer as a name or a face. You become texture, atmosphere, presence." Nysa felt the truth of this settle into her chest, a warm weight that did not hurt but comforted. Cleopatra smiled gently, her eyes glowing faintly in the lamplight. "I will soon become part of the milk," she whispered, "not as a ritual anymore, but as being itself." Nysa nodded, her breath sinking with the queen's. She understood. This was not about death. It was about transformation, about becoming something too soft to be grasped, too gentle to be destroyed. Cleopatra asked for the milk to be prepared again that evening. But this time, the ritual began differently. The queen held Nysa's hand for a moment before stepping into the bath. Her fingers were warm, her grip soft. "Remember this," she whispered. "Not the sharp things, not the battles. Remember the softness." Nysa's eyes filled with tears, not of sorrow, but of release. She would carry this memory forever, like silk folded gently into her mind. The milk was ready, warm and shimmering, its surface glowing faintly under the low lamps. Cleopatra stepped into it slowly, her breath steady, her body calm. She whispered again, not to Nysa, but to the milk itself. "Tonight, I ask you to hold me fully. No more pieces left behind." The milk rippled softly, responding without sound. Cleopatra sank into it, her body floating, her thoughts dissolving. In her mind, she let go of everything. Her crown, her name, her stories, her regrets. She kept only the softness, the feeling of milk on skin, of breath in silence, of warmth. Without borders, she whispered the final words of her ritual, the words she had never shared before, even with Nysa. They were not words in Greek or Egyptian, but sounds older than language sounds, like breath, like wind through reeds, like the hush before sleep. Nysa stood silently, her eyes half closed, her breath slow. She felt the queen's whispers thread through her mind, not as commands, but as invitations. Let go, they said. Soften, dissolve, become part of everything that cannot be written down. Cleopatra's body floated still, her face calm, her eyes closed. For hours she stayed in the milk, her breath so soft it seemed to have stopped. But Nysa knew better. The queen was not gone. She was simply elsewhere, folded into the texture of the moment. Part of the milk now, part of the air. The petals on the milk's surface spun slowly, their patterns gentle, their movements soft. The milk shimmered faintly, holding the queen's body in her memory, blending them into something new. At some point, Cleopatra's lips moved one last time. Her voice was a breath against the air, barely more than silence. Nysa heard it not, with her ears, but with her heart. I am home now. I am softness itself. And with that, the queen's body became still, but not cold. Her skin remained warm, her face peaceful. Her breath merged with the milk's surface, with the air, with the gentle hush of the night. Nysa did not cry. She stayed beside the basin, her hands folded, her mind calm. She knew the queen had not died. She had transformed, become part of something softer than life, something no conqueror could touch. The milk held her now, just as it had always done, but this time fully, completely. The room remained silent, the lamps flickering gently. Outside, Alexandria slept. The harbor waves whispered against the shore. The stars hung low, soft points of light in the dark sky. Nysa stayed by the milk until dawn, her breath slow, her eyes open, her mind wrapped in calm. When the sun rose, she did not call for the other servants. She did not announce the queen's passing. There was nothing to announce. Cleopatra had simply shifted, become part of the morning mist, part of the softness of the air, part of the memory of milk. Nysa knew her role now more than ever. She would carry this story, not as a history to be carved in stone, but as a whisper to be shared quietly, in moments of rest, in the hush before sleep. She would tell of a queen who chose not to fight death, but to dissolve into something gentler. She would remind others that not all legacies are written in books. Some are held in breath, in silence, in the soft swirl of milk before sleep. And so, as the new day began, Nysa whispered a final promise to the queen. I will remember the softness. I will share it, gently, with those who need it. And I will never let the sharpness of the world erase this calm. The milk cooled slowly, its surface calm, its memory intact. The queen's story was safe not in scrolls, but in softness, in silence, in the gentle breath between night and morning. Have you ever wondered what it means to become part of a ritual so completely that you are no longer separate from it? That is what happened to Cleopatra. Her body may have dissolved into the milk, but her presence did not vanish. It lingered softly, woven into the very air of the palace. Nysa knew this the moment she opened her eyes the next morning. She had fallen asleep beside the milk basin, her head resting against soft linen, her breath slow, her dreams gentle. When she awoke, the queen's body was gone, but the milk still shimmered, its surface calm, holding faint ripples that carried more than just memory. They carried presence. Nysa did not panic. She did not call for the guards or summon the scribes. She understood what had happened. Cleopatra had chosen not to return. She had folded herself fully into the ritual, becoming part of the milk, part of the softness. And in doing so, she had escaped history's sharpness. There would be no tomb, no grand ceremony, no carving of names into stone. Instead, there would be this, a memory held softly, passed quietly, like the gentle swirl of milk in warm water. Nysa sat quietly by the basin, her breath calm. She reached her hand toward the surface of the milk, but did not touch it. She watched, the way it moved, the way it reflected the lamplight, the way it shimmered faintly, even as the morning sun crept into the room. The milk was no longer just milk. It was Cleopatra's story. Now her softness, her surrender, her choice to become something other than legend. Nysa closed her eyes, letting her breath sink with the quiet of the room. She thought of the nights she had spent watching the queen slip into the milk, of the whispers she had heard, of the lessons learned in silence. She thought of the spiral word Cleopatra had spoken so often, the sound that was not a word at all, but a gentle folding of breath into breath. She whispered it softly now, not aloud but inside herself, letting it spin gently in her mind. The room stayed calm, the milk steady. Nysa knew the world outside would soon notice the queen's absence. Rome would send messengers. Advisors would. Knock on doors. Servants would wonder what to do next. But Nysa did not move. She stayed beside the milk, her hands resting softly in her lap, her mind clear. She understood that the queen's choice was not an end, but a soft transition, a dissolving into something that could not be written down or controlled. In the days that followed, Nysa tended the milk as she would tend a garden. She kept it warm, refreshed its surface with rose petals, and whispered to it softly each night. She spoke not to the memory of Cleopatra, but to Cleopatra herself, knowing she was still there, not as a queen, but as part of the room, part of the air, part of the softness. The palace changed quietly. The courtiers, unsure of what had happened, whispered in corners. Some said the queen had vanished through magic. Others believed she had escaped to some hidden chamber. A few thought she had died in her sleep. But Nysa knew the truth, and she told no one, not because she wanted to keep a secret, but because the story was too soft to survive in the sharp world of politics and power. It was a story meant for the night, for whispers, for breath shared. Between people before sleep, Nysa became a different kind of keeper, now not of scrolls or records, but of softness. She tended the queen's legacy not by building monuments, but by preserving atmosphere. She made sure the queen's chambers stayed calm, the milk basin clean, the rituals gentle. At night, she whispered to the milk, telling it stories of the world outside, the markets bustling, the children playing, the river flowing softly past Alexandria's shores. She knew Cleopatra listened, not with ears, but with presence. The milk shimmered faintly in response, its surface calm, its memory intact. Months passed, and still Nysa kept the ritual alive. She began to notice small changes in herself. Her breath was slower now, her thoughts softer. She no longer worried about things that once seemed urgent. She found herself letting go of sharpness, choosing calm over control, quiet over command. She realized that the milk had taught her the same lessons it had taught the queen. That softness is stronger than stone, that presence is better than legacy, and that surrender is not weakness, but a different kind of power. One night, long after the first milk ritual had begun, Nysa sat beside the basin and whispered a question, not aloud, but in her thoughts. What happens now? The milk responded not with words, but with warmth. Nysa felt it settle into her bones. A calm like sleep, but deeper. She closed her eyes and saw visions, not of the future, not of the past, but of soft moments stretched out gently, without edges. She saw Cleopatra floating still, her body part of rivers, part of clouds, part of the hush before dawn. She saw women in distant times, brushing their skin with fragrant oils, not knowing why, but feeling a connection to something ancient. She saw hands stirring milk into tea, mothers humming lullabies, lovers sharing whispers in the dark. And she realized this was the Queen's legacy. Not a monument, not a battle won or lost, but a ripple of softness passed forward through time. Nysa promised silently to keep this ripple moving. She would carry it in her breath, in her stillness, in the way she taught others to soften their hearts at the end of the day. She would not speak of Cleopatra's milk bath as a historical event, but as a gentle practice one that could be repeated by anyone, anywhere, with a bowl of warm liquid, a moment of silence, and the willingness to dissolve for a while into something calm. Years passed. Nysa grew older, her hair silvering softly. But she never left the Queen's chambers. She tended the milk each night, even when no one asked her to. She whispered to it, letting the air fill with calm. Visitors came and went, rulers changed, and the city's walls aged. But the milk remained, and so did the softness. And sometimes, in the quietest moments, Nysa thought she heard the Queen's voice, not as a sound, but as a feeling. "I am still here," the voice said, not as a person, but as part of the calm. Nysa smiled gently, her breath steady. She understood completely. Cleopatra had not vanished. She had simply dissolved into the softness of the world, into the milk, into the air, into the hush that comes just before sleep. And that was exactly how she wanted to be remembered. Have you ever wondered how a story can survive without being told aloud how it can live quietly, beneath the surface of things like warmth held in water or breath hidden in silence? That was how Cleopatra's final ritual continued after her soft dissolving into the milk. Nysa, the keeper of the Queen's memory, understood this perfectly. She did not write the story down. She did not carve it into stone or ink it onto scrolls. She carried it in her breath, in her stillness, in the way she moved through the palace softly, leaving no sharp edges behind. Each night, she prepared the milk as she always had, warming it gently, mixing in rose oil and honey, letting petals float on the surface. But now, there was no queen to step into the bath. Or perhaps there was. Nysa often wondered if Cleopatra had really gone, or if she had simply changed form. Sometimes, late at night, Nysa would sit beside the milk and feel the air shift gently around her, as if the Queen's breath still lingered there. The milk would ripple softly, without wind, as though responding to a presence too quiet for ordinary eyes to see. Nysa would close her eyes and listen not for words, but for feelings. Calm, warmth, softness. These were the messages now. Not commands, not politics, not instructions for ruling an empire, but the gentle echoes of someone who had chosen to dissolve into something gentler than history. The world outside the palace moved on, unaware. Rome pressed forward with its ambitions. Alexandria continued its daily life, traders bartering in the market, scribes copying texts, children playing by the riverbanks. But inside Cleopatra's private chambers, time softened. Nysa no longer counted days. She let the hours flow like the milk, unmeasured, without edges. Her life became a series of quiet moments, preparing the milk, sitting beside it, whispering into the air. She shared stories with the milk, not of conquests or alliances, but of small things. The scent of rain on stone, the hush of the palace. Garden at dusk, the soft breath of sleep coming to a child. She knew Cleopatra heard her, not with ears, but through the texture of the moment. Sometimes, when Nysa dipped her fingers into the milk to stir the petals, she felt warmth beyond the liquid, a gentle pulse, like a heart still beating, but not in any single body. It was as if Cleopatra's essence had blended with the milk, completely, becoming part of the softness that surrounded Nysa's every breath. The other servants left her alone. They did not understand the ritual, but they respected it. They whispered about Nysa's quiet devotion, calling her the last priestess of the forgotten queen. But Nysa knew better. She was not a priestess. She was a keeper of softness, a guardian of something too gentle to be written into history books. She spent her days in silence, moving slowly, pending the milk, letting her thoughts drift like petals on warm liquid. At night, when the palace grew still, she sat by the basin and whispered, not because she expected an answer, but because the act of whispering itself was enough. Her voice became part of the calm, blending into the milk, folding into the air. Sometimes she imagined that Cleopatra whispered back not in words, but in warmth. Nysa felt it in her bones, in her breath, in the soft beating of her heart. She knew the queen was still present, not as a ruler, but as part of the quiet. Years passed. Nysa grew older. Her hair turned silver, her skin soft with age. But her hands remained steady when she prepared the milk each night. She added petals as always, stirred gently, whispered. She taught younger servants how to prepare. The bath, not as a royal ritual anymore, but as a practice of calm. She told them, this is not about beauty. This is about softness, about letting go, about becoming part of something gentler than life. The servants listened, their eyes wide, their hearts softening. They began to understand that the ritual was not about Cleopatra anymore. It was about everyone who needed softness in a world too sharp. Nysa taught them to breathe slowly, to move gently, to care for the milk as they would care for sleep itself. She told them stories not of war or power, but of calm nights, of whispered breaths, of the hush that comes when you choose not to hold on so tightly. And slowly, the practice spread beyond the queen's chamber. Women in the palace began preparing their bowls of warm milk at night, adding rose petals, stirring slowly, letting the warmth soften their minds before sleep. They whispered their worries into the liquid, letting the milk hold their fears gently, dissolving sharp thoughts into something quieter. Nysa watched this happen with calm satisfaction. She saw the ripple of softness move through the palace, a quiet legacy of the queen who had chosen to become part of the milk rather than part of history's harshness. The tradition grew. It moved beyond Alexandria, carried by travelers and traders, whispered between women in distant villages. No one spoke of Cleopatra by name anymore, but the practice remained a bowl of warm milk at night, a moment of quiet, a letting go of the day's sharpness. Nysa knew this was the queen's true legacy, not the monuments, not the politics, but the softness, the calm, the choice to dissolve gently rather than fight endlessly. As Nysa's life drew toward its soft ending, she felt no fear. She knew she would soon join the queen, not in death, but in the calm place where breath folds into breath, where memory becomes atmosphere. One night, as she sat beside the milk for the last time, she whispered a final message, not to Cleopatra, but to the air itself. Let me become part of this softness too. Let me dissolve without sharpness. Let me join the queen in the place where names are not needed. Her breath slowed, her eyes closed, her body relaxed. And in that quiet moment, she felt herself become part of the milk, not physically, but in spirit. She folded into the calm, into the softness, into the gentle ripple of the ritual that had no beginning and no end. The milk shimmered faintly, holding Nysa's whisper as it had held Cleopatra's, carrying it forward, soft and eternal. And so the story continued, not in books, not in monuments, but in every quiet moment when someone chose to soften before sleep, to let go of the day, to whisper into a bowl of warm milk, becoming part of something gentler than time. Have you ever wondered what happens to a story when it is no longer told in words, but in actions, in habits, in quiet gestures passed from one person to another? That is how Cleopatra's final ritual lived on, even after her body dissolved into the milk and Nysa's last breath faded into silence. The practice did not stop. It flowed gently through time, carried by women who did not know its origin, but felt its softness in their bones. In Alexandria, after Nysa's passing, the milk baths continued. Servants, mothers, and daughters prepared warm bowls each night, not for beauty, but for calm. They whispered their worries into the milk, stirred the petals softly, and let the liquid hold their fears until they faded into something gentle. No one spoke of queens or palaces. They spoke only of softness. The practice moved beyond the palace. Walls carried by travelers who had heard the whispers. Along the Nile, women taught their daughters to prepare warm milk before sleep. In quiet villages, grandmothers shared the ritual with granddaughters, telling them not to be afraid of letting go. They said, "Stir the milk slowly. Let your breath follow its rhythm. Release the day's sharpness into the liquid. Let it dissolve. Let it soften." And so the ritual became part of life, woven into the quiet moments at the end of each day. Across generations, the practice remained untouched by the harshness of history, invisible to conquerors, too soft to be recorded in scrolls or carved into stone. In Rome, where Cleopatra's name was remembered only in stories of seduction and politics, no one knew about the milk ritual, but the softness still reached them. Roman women heard whispers of strange Egyptian customs and began preparing their versions: bowls of warm milk with honey, baths with petals, quiet moments before sleep where they let go of the day's weight. They did not know they were continuing Cleopatra's final act of softness, but the milk remembered. In distant lands, the practice adapted. In Greece, women added lavender. In Persia, they stirred in saffron. In India, they blended cardamom and cinnamon, whispering their hopes into the steam rising from their bowls. The ingredients changed, but the essence remained. Softness before sleep, the letting go of sharp thoughts, the folding of breath into calm. Time passed. Centuries turned. The milk ritual survived, hidden in the fabric of daily life. People forgot where it began, but they kept the practice alive without knowing its source. The world grew louder, sharper, filled with wars and empires and written histories. But in quiet bedrooms, in the hush of night, the ritual continued. A mother in a small village would warm milk for her child, stirring it gently, humming softly. A healer in a distant temple would prepare a bath with rose petals, teaching her apprentices to move slowly, to breathe deeply, to soften their hands. A woman alone in her room would close her eyes, sip warm milk, and feel the day's hardness dissolve into something calm. None of them knew Cleopatra's name. None of them knew Nysa's story. But the softness lived on. The milk carried it. The air remembered. And so did the hands that stirred the liquid, night after night, century after century. The practice became part of the human rhythm, a way to transition from waking to sleeping, from holding on to letting go. And perhaps that was Cleopatra's true legacy, not a kingdom, not a legend, but a quiet dissolving that moved through time without names, without monuments, without conquest. In forgotten corners of the world, the milk ritual remained. In monasteries, where monks rose early to pray, they drank warm milk in silence before dawn, not knowing they were echoing an ancient queen's final ritual. In desert caravans, travelers shared bowls of milk under the stars, whispering their thoughts into the night, letting go of burdens before sleep. In cold mountain villages, grandmothers taught children to heat milk slowly, to stir gently, to close their eyes and breathe out the day's worries into the steam. The practice needed no explanation. Its softness was its language. It whispered to the body in ways the mind could not resist. The warmth of the milk relaxed muscles, slowed the heart, calmed the breath. The gentle stirring mirrored the slowing of thoughts. The act of drinking became a ritual of surrender, a way to say, I release this day. I choose calm. I fold into softness now. Somewhere, beyond memory, Cleopatra's essence lingered not as a ghost, not as a queen, but as part of this nightly softness. Her choice to dissolve into the milk had become part of human habit, part of the gentle architecture of sleep. There were no statues to mark it, no scrolls to record it, but the milk knew. The air knew. The hands that stirred and whispered each. Night carried the memory forward, softly, quietly, without sharpness. And so, the ritual continued. In every warm bowl of milk prepared before sleep, in every soft breath taken at the end of the day, Cleopatra's final decision lived on not in history books, but in human softness, passed from heart to heart, from hand to hand, from breath to breath. And the world, in its quietest moments, still feels it. Have you ever wondered how small, gentle rituals outlast the loudest events of history? How something as simple as warming milk before sleep can survive centuries while empires rise and fall, their names fading into dust? That is exactly what happened with Cleopatra's final ritual, long after her name became a symbol in Ramang. Text reduced to tales of power, beauty, and downfall, the softness she chose at the end of her life continued quietly, beyond the reach of politics or monuments. No historian recorded the milk ritual as part of Cleopatra's legacy. Scrolls spoke of her alliances, her lovers, her wars, but none mentioned the nights she dissolved into the bath, whispering to the milk, becoming part of something softer than time. Yet, the milk remembered, and so did the people who, unknowingly, carried her practice forward. In homes far from Alexandria, in places where no one knew of palaces or queens, women still prepared bowls of warm milk before sleep. They stirred petals into it, not because they knew Cleopatra had once done so, but because the gesture had become part of human comfort. A mother in a quiet village would prepare milk for her children at night, humming softly as she stirred. A scent of honey would fill the room. The warmth would relax their bodies, and the gentle rhythm of the spoon would calm their minds. No one spoke of history in these moments. There was only breath, softness, and the letting go of the day's weight. The ritual outlived kingdoms. It traveled beyond Egypt, beyond Rome, beyond the names carved into stone. It became something, woven into life itself, a nightly pause, a surrender to sleep, a return to softness after the sharpness of day. In ancient temples, where priests whispered prayers to stars, milk was offered not just to gods, but to the night itself, a gesture of peace. In desert caravans under dark skies, travelers shared warm milk before sleep, believing it protected them from harsh dreams. In quiet homes across continents, women taught each other how to prepare milk baths, not for beauty, but for calm, for release, for the soft folding of breath into rest. No one asked where the practice began. It no longer mattered. It was part of the human rhythm now. And perhaps that was what Cleopatra had intended all along, not to be remembered as a queen or a lover or a figure in history, but as a ripple of softness moving quietly through time. The milk held her memory better than any scroll could. The act of stirring, of warming, of whispering into the liquid carried her presence forward without need for names or titles. Nysa had understood this in her final days. Before her last breath, she whispered not to people, but to the milk itself, passing the softness onward. She did not fear being forgotten, because the practice itself was the legacy. Every time someone prepared warm milk at night, every time hands moved gently, every time breath slowed before sleep, the memory continued not as history, but as texture, as calm, as atmosphere. Generations passed. The world changed. New rulers came and went. Languages shifted. Borders were redrawn. But the milk ritual remained. In each new era, it adapted quietly. In cold mountain villages, people added spices like cinnamon or cardamom, whispering as they stirred. In coastal towns, women mixed in lavender or sea salt, letting the scents fold into the steam. In cities where life rushed fast, some paused at night to prepare warm milk with honey, finding a moment of stillness before closing their eyes. The ingredients changed, but the softness did not. The ritual was always the same at its core. A gentle letting go, a softening of the day's sharpness, a surrender to sleep. Some called it tradition, some called it comfort. But beneath those names was the same act, the same quiet decision. Cleopatra had once made in her private chamber, long before the world learned her name through conquest or scandal. The milk carried her essence, not because anyone intended to preserve it, but because softness is hard to erase. It lingers where sharpness fades. It survives where power collapses. It moves quietly through time, unnoticed but essential. In places far from Alexandria, people still whispered into bowls of milk at night. They let the steam rise, carrying their breath softly into the air. They thought of their worries and let them go. They closed their eyes and drifted toward sleep, held by warmth, by calm, by the gentle rhythm of breath. They did not know they were repeating Cleopatra's final ritual, but the milk knew, the air knew, the practice continued. In quiet corners of the world, in bedrooms lit only by moonlight, the same softness returned each night. A woman sitting alone by her window would sip warm milk, feeling the calm spread through her chest. A child curled under blankets would listen to the gentle sound of a mother stirring milk in the next room, comforted by the rhythm. An elder, remembering days long gone, would prepare milk with rose petals, closing her eyes and whispering to herself, "Let me soften before sleep. Let me dissolve gently into the night." These moments wove together across time, creating an invisible thread of calm that stretched from Cleopatra's chamber to every place where softness was chosen over sharpness. And perhaps, somewhere beyond time, Cleopatra herself still lingered not as a queen of Egypt, but as part of this nightly ritual, as the warmth in the milk, as the calm in the air, as the softness in the hush before sleep. The world outside continued to change, new empires, new technologies, new ways of recording stories. But the milk ritual remained untouched by these shifts. It stayed close to the body, close to the breath, close to the human need for calm. It did not need scrolls or monuments. It needed only hands stirring slowly, whispers shared with the night, and the quiet choice to soften before sleep. And so, Cleopatra's final act continued not in history books, but in every gentle sip, in every warm bowl, in every quiet breath taken at the edge of night. The milk remembered. The air carried it forward, and the softness stayed. Have you ever thought about how the smallest habits become the deepest traditions? How something you do quietly each night, without thinking, can become part of the world's secret memory. That's exactly what happened with Cleopatra's milk ritual. It did not fade when she dissolved into the softness of her final bath. It did not vanish when Nysa closed her eyes for the last time. It survived in the most ordinary places, through the fingertips of people who had no idea they were continuing a queen's legacy. Somewhere in a small room, far from Alexandria's golden walls, a woman stirred warm milk by lamplight, her hands steady, her breath soft. She did not know she was repeating a royal ritual. She only knew it helped her sleep. She whispered too, herself letting the day's sharpness dissolve into the liquid, her worries folding quietly into the steam. And milk shimmered slightly in the bowl, not because of magic, but because of something older, something passed from breath to breath, from gesture to gesture. Cleopatra's softness had become part of the air, part of human rhythm. In distant lands where no one spoke of pharaohs or Rome, the same practice continued. People in cold mountain villages warmed milk with honey before sleep, their hands moving slowly, their minds calming. In coastal towns where waves whispered against stone walls, families sipped milk together at night, letting the warmth settle. Their hearts. No one asked where the habit came from. It was just something people did, the way they breathed, the way they closed their eyes at the end of the day. And that was the beauty of it. Cleopatra's final choice, to dissolve into softness, to let go of sharpness, had become part of the human pattern. It no longer needed a name. It no longer needed a story. It lived quietly in the spaces between day and night, in the moments. Before sleep, in the hush of breath shared between generations. Somewhere, a grandmother taught her granddaughter how to prepare the milk. "Stir it slowly," she said. "Don't rush. Let the warmth hold you. Whisper your thoughts into it, and let them float away." The child nodded, her eyes soft, her hands learning the rhythm. She would remember this not as history, but as comfort. In another place, a healer prepared milk for someone who could not rest. She added rose petals and lavender, stirred with care, and said nothing as the person sipped the warm liquid. She knew that silence was part of the ritual, the letting go of words, the folding into calm. And somewhere else, in the quiet of a night too heavy with thoughts, a person sat alone, warmed milk on the fire, and whispered into the steam, "Let me soften. Let me release this day. Let me become calm." These small acts were not written down. They did not make it into history books, but they carried Cleopatra's final choice across centuries, woven invisibly into human life. And perhaps that was the softest victory of all, not to be remembered in monuments, but to be remembered in breath, in silence, in the quiet dissolving of sharpness into milk. The milk ritual continued not because of power, but because of need. The world became louder, faster, sharper. People found new ways to build and break, to conquer and forget. But still, at night, they returned to softness. They prepared warm milk. They stirred gently. They whispered to the liquid, letting their worries dissolve into something calmer. In this way, Cleopatra's ritual became part of human sleep, part of the architecture of rest. No one noticed when it began. No one tried to control it. It spread quietly, from hand to hand, from heart to heart. And it remained because it was useful not for politics, but for peace. In times of war, people still prepared milk at night, knowing it would help them rest. In times of sorrow, they stirred the liquid slowly, letting the warmth carry away their heaviness. In times of joy, they shared milk, marking the end of a day with calm. The practice needed no temple. It needed no leader. It lived in kitchens and bedrooms, in quiet corners where people chose softness over sharpness. Sharpness. Somewhere, far from the cities, a group of women gathered under the moon. They prepared milk together, adding petals, breathing softly. They did not speak of queens or history. They only shared the moment, their hands moving slowly, their hearts calming. They passed bowls to each other, sipped quietly, and let the night fold around them like silk. They were not performing a ritual in the grand sense. They were simply being human, choosing softness before sleep, choosing calm over chaos. And that choice, repeated night after night, became stronger than any empire. The milk held these moments, carrying them forward, rippling softly through time. Cleopatra's story continued, not as legend, but as habit, as comfort, as calm. Somewhere, a mother rocked her child to sleep, whispering while the milk warmed. She did not know she was echoing a queen's last breath. She only knew it helped. Somewhere else, a healer closed her eyes beside a bowl of milk, letting her worries soften before tending to others. The milk shimmered quietly, holding her breath, folding it into the long chain of human softness. The world changed, new rulers came, new technologies emerged, and new stories were written. But the milk ritual remained the same at its core. Warm liquid, soft breath, a gentle letting go of the day. No one needed to remember Cleopatra for the practice to survive. The milk remembered. The hands that stirred remembered, even if they did not know why. And perhaps, somewhere beyond time, Cleopatra herself lingered not as a name, not as a figure in history, but as part of the texture of sleep, part of the hush that comes when the day ends and the night begins. Her final choice was still alive. In every gentle moment of release, in every bowl of milk prepared in silence, in every breath taken softly before sleep. And that was a legacy no empire could erase. Have you ever wondered what happens to a ritual when no one remembers where it began, yet everyone still does it? That is how Cleopatra's final act became part of the world, not as history, but as a habit so gentle, so small, that it slipped past the sharpness of memory and settled quietly into the human body. Night after night, across centuries and continents, people continued to prepare warm milk before sleep. They stirred slowly, whispered, and let their breath match the gentle circles of the spoon. They did not know they were echoing a queen who had once chosen to dissolve into softness. They only knew it felt right. Somewhere, in a dim room lit only by the glow of a single candle, a woman sat alone. She held a bowl of milk in her hands, watching the steam rise, her breath slowing with each swirl of her spoon. She thought of the day's worries, not to hold them tighter, but to let them go. She whispered into the milk, her words fading into warmth. Her heart softened, her eyes closed, and in that moment, she became part of the same ritual Cleopatra had chosen at the end of her life. In another place, a man returning from work sat by his small fire. His shoulders were heavy with the weight of the day, but as he warmed his milk, his chest loosened. He stirred the liquid, letting the rhythm calm his breath. He did not think of rulers or queens. He thought only of sleep, of calm, of the quiet release that came with warmth. He sipped slowly, and in doing so, became part of the same lineage, of softness, even without knowing it. The ritual was no longer tied to names or places. It moved like breath, passing through time quietly. It became part of the human instinct to soften at the end of the day, to fold into rest, to prepare the body for the dissolving of sleep. Cleopatra's choice had become a universal gesture. In temples, monks prepared warm drinks before meditation, their hands steady, their thoughts softening with each sip. In small homes where no one read history, parents calmed their children with warm milk, humming softly, teaching them to breathe out the day. In palaces and huts, in cities and villages, the ritual continued not because anyone commanded it, but because it worked. It was simple, it was human, and it was stronger than history. Somewhere, a healer wrote down a recipe, not for medicine, but for calm. Warm the milk slowly, she wrote. Stir in honey if you have it. Add petals if you like. Whisper to the milk as you stir, letting your breath slow. Drink while it is warm. Let go of the day. Sleep softly. She did not know she was writing the echo of Cleopatra's final act. She only knew it helped people rest. And so the ritual spread, not as a secret, but as a shared softness. It became part of sleep itself. The body learned it without needing to think. The hands knew the rhythm of stirring. The breath knew how to match the circles in the bowl. The heart knew how to loosen its grip on the day. And somewhere beyond all of this, beyond time, beyond memory, Cleopatra's essence lingered not as a ghost, not as a story, but as part of the atmosphere. She had chosen to dissolve into the milk, and in doing so, had dissolved into the world's nightly rituals. She was there in the hush before sleep, in the warmth of the cup, in the soft breath let out when the body releases its tension. Her legacy was not in books or monuments. It was in every moment someone chose calm over chaos, softness over sharpness, rest over struggle. The milk held her memory quietly, and the people who stirred it, who whispered to it, who drank it slowly before bed, they carried her forward without knowing it. Generations passed. The world shifted again and again. Empires rose and fell. New technologies came. But still, in quiet corners of the night, people prepared warm milk. They stirred softly. They whispered their worries into the liquid. They breathed out the day and fell into sleep. They kept Cleopatra alive in the only way that mattered, not as a queen, but as part of the human need for softness. Somewhere, a young girl learned the ritual from her grandmother. She watched the way. The elder's hands moved, slow and gentle, the way her breath matched the circles in the bowl. The girl asked no questions. She simply learned, the way people learn to close their eyes when tired, the way they learn to sigh at the end of a long day. The milk carried the memory forward, softer than any story, deeper than any record. Somewhere else, in the quiet of a winter night, a person alone prepared warm milk not because of tradition, but because of instinct. The world outside was cold and loud, but inside, in that moment, there was calm. The steam rose, the breath slowed, the heart softened. Cleopatra was there not as a figure in history, but as part of the calm itself. Her final choice echoed in the quiet sip, in the warm breath, in the soft letting go of the day. And that was the true power of the ritual. It asked for nothing except softness. It demanded no temple, no ceremony. It required only breath, warmth, and the willingness to dissolve for a moment into calm. The milk held this practice gently, carrying it through time, never breaking, never fading. It was too soft to be erased. And so, every night, in places, near and far, the same gesture repeated itself. Hands warmed milk, breath slowed, worries dissolved. Sleep came gently. And somewhere, beyond the reach of names and dates, Cleopatra's final decision lived on not as legend, but as the texture of calm at the end of the day. Have you ever thought about how the quietest choices ripple the farthest? How a single, gentle act, done not for glory, but for softness, can weave itself into the fabric of life more deeply than the loudest conquests? Cleopatra understood this in the final days of her ritual. When she chose to dissolve into the milk, she knew. She was not choosing death. She was choosing something older, something wider. She was choosing to become part of softness itself, a texture, a warmth, a hush that would carry her further than any army could march. And so, centuries later, her final choice still lived, not in palaces or scrolls, but in the simplest corners of human life. Somewhere, in a house far from temples or history books, a woman stirred warm milk over a small fire. Her hands moved slowly, the spoon circling the pot, her breath syncing with the rhythm. She whispered not prayers, not plans, but simple breath, letting the day slip out of her body and into the steam rising from the bowl. She did not know she was continuing Cleopatra's ritual. She only knew it made her sleep easier. In another home, a father prepared warm milk for his child, teaching the same rhythm. Stir slowly. Breathe with the circles. Let your shoulders soften. Let the warmth carry you to sleep. The child closed their eyes, their small hands wrapped around the cup, learning not just how to drink, but how to release the day's weight. Across oceans and generations, the same gestures repeated quietly. People added new ingredients, spices, herbs, scents that made sense in their own time and place. But the heart of the ritual never changed. It was always about softness, about letting go, about folding into sleep without sharpness. Somewhere in a distant monastery, monks prepared warm milk before dawn, not for energy, but for calm. They drank slowly, in silence, preparing their minds for the softness of meditation. The milk, warmed and stirred in quiet circles, carried them gently into the day's first breath. In villages where no one remembered Cleopatra's name, the ritual still lived. Women gathered in kitchens at night, sharing bowls of milk, letting laughter soften into quiet as sleep approached. They did not call it a ritual. They called it life. The milk was part of the air now, part of the breath between day and night. It held memory without holding names. It carried comfort without needing explanation. And somewhere, beyond time, Cleopatra's presence remained, not as a ruler, but as part of this softness, as the warmth in the cup, as the calm in the breath, as the hush that comes before sleep. No scrolls recorded this. No historian captured. But the milk knew. The hands that stirred knew, even if they could not say why. The practice survived because it was needed not just in Cleopatra's time, but always. The world is sharp, but the milk is soft. The days are long, but the night offers a place to release them. The heart holds too much sometimes, but the ritual of warm milk teaches it how to let go. Somewhere, a healer whispered this to a patient who could not sleep. "Warm the milk," she said. "Stir slowly. Breathe with it. Let your worries float on the surface, then watch them fade." The patient followed the instructions, their breath slowing, their eyes closing softly. They did not know they were repeating the last breath of a queen, but it did not matter. The softness worked, with or without the story. In another place, a poet sat alone by candlelight, writing lines they would never share. Before sleep, they warmed milk, stirred it with a spoon, and whispered into it softly. The words were not for anyone else. They were for the milk, for the night, for the letting go of sharpness. The milk shimmered gently, reflecting the poet's breath, holding the words without keeping them. And somewhere else, in a city where the streets never truly slept, someone paused after a long day, standing quietly in their kitchen, stirring milk in the hush of midnight. They whispered into the steam, not in full sentences, but in feelings. "Let this be soft. Let me sleep. Let me dissolve the noise of today." And the milk, as always, listened. It had listened for centuries. It is remembered without effort. It carried Cleopatra's choice, not as a legend, but as a sensation, a warmth, a texture that traveled through hands and breath. The ritual became part of human sleep. It became a practice of softness, passed quietly from one life to another. It did not ask for attention. It asked only for repetition, for breath, for the gentle willingness to soften before the body closed its eyes. And so the world kept going. Empires changed. New names rose and fell. But the milk stayed. The circles of the spoon stayed. The breath, slowing at the end of the day, stayed. Somewhere, a child asked why the milk had to be stirred slowly. The answer was simple: because that's how we rest. That's how we release the day. That's how we remember softness. The child learned, their hands small but steady, their eyes calm. They would grow up carrying the practice, teaching it to someone else without needing to explain where it came from. The milk would carry the memory forward. In every warm sip, in every soft breath before sleep, Cleopatra's final act lived on, not as history, but as calm, as hush, as the gentle dissolving of day into night. And somewhere, beyond the world's noise, her presence remained not in stone, but in softness. Have you ever thought about the way softness becomes a secret language, how the smallest gestures, the quietest rituals, speak louder than any story? Told aloud? That's what happened with Cleopatra's final choice. She had once ruled with sharpness, with wit, with beauty wrapped in strategy. But in the end, she chose something else. She chose to dissolve, to slip beneath the surface of the milk, to become part of a tradition too soft to be captured by history books. And because of that choice, her legacy survived not in scrolls, but in hands stirring warm liquid late at night, in breaths slowing before sleep, in the hush that comes when the day folds into the night. Somewhere, in a quiet room lit only by the glow of a single oil lamp, a person prepared their nightly milk. They did not know they were part of Cleopatra's ritual. They only knew it brought comfort. Their spoon moved in slow circles, their breath softened, and their mind let go of the sharpness of the day. As the milk warmed, they whispered not to anyone else, but to the moment itself. Let me soften now. Let me rest. Let me float. They sipped the milk, feeling the warmth move through their body, dissolving tension, loosening thought. And in that moment, they unknowingly continued the queen's final act. In another home, far from palaces or temples, a healer prepared warm milk. For a restless patient, the healer stirred with care, her hands moving softly, her breath slow. She whispered to the milk, just as Nysa once did, just as Cleopatra once had. Carry this worry away. Fold it into calm. The patient drank, their breath slowing, their shoulders relaxing. Sleep came gently, not as a command, but as an invitation. The milk shimmered faintly in the bowl, holding the memory of the ritual without needing to explain it. Across time, in cities and villages, in places where Cleopatra's name was forgotten, the same softness lived on. The milk ritual traveled quietly through generations, not because people remembered where it came from, but because they remembered how it felt. Somewhere, a family gathered at the end of a long day. They sat together, each holding a small bowl of warm milk. They sipped in silence, letting the warmth fill the spaces between them. There were no grand stories told, no lessons given. The ritual spoke for itself. The breath slowed. The day released its grip. Sleep approached softly. And Cleopatra, though no one said her name, was there in the texture of the moment, in the warmth, in the hush, in the shared softness. The milk had become a carrier of calm, a vessel for letting go. It held not just warmth, but the memory of surrender, of choosing rest over resistance, of letting the body melt into the night without fear. Somewhere else, under the cover of night, a woman sat by a window, her hands wrapped around a cup of milk. She looked at the moon, her thoughts drifting. She stirred the liquid slowly, her breath matching the rhythm. She whispered into the steam, I don't need to hold everything tonight. Let me soften. Let me dissolve. She did not know that centuries before, in a different world, a queen had whispered something similar into a bath of milk, letting her crown slide away, letting her name fade, choosing softness over story. But the milk knew. The milk remembered. It held these whispers like petals on its surface, carrying them through time. In small kitchens, in quiet bedrooms, in the hush of early morning or the stillness of midnight, people continued the same. Practice without knowing why. They stirred. They breathed. They let go. The ritual became part of the body's memory. Hands knew how to move slowly. Breath knew how to fold into softness. The heart knew how to release the tight grip of the day. And all of this happened without anyone needing to say Cleopatra's name. The softness was enough. Somewhere, a mother taught her child the practice, just as her mother had taught her. Warm the milk, stir gently. Whisper to it if you need to. Let it take your heaviness away. The child listened, their eyes wide, their breath slowing. They learned not just how to prepare the milk, but how to prepare themselves for sleep, for softness, for surrender. The ritual became part of life's quiet architecture, the bridge between wakefulness and rest, between day's sharpness and night's calm. It did not matter who started it. What mattered was that it continued. The milk carried the practice forward, softly, without need for explanation. In distant temples, in small homes, in silent moments of breath shared between loved ones. The same rhythm repeated: stir, whisper, sip, soften. Somewhere, a traveler alone in the night prepared milk over a small flame. They watched the liquid swirl, the petals float, the steam rise. They thought of the road behind them, the road ahead. And in that moment, they chose to let go of both, folding into the now, the warmth, the breath, the softness. Cleopatra's presence was there too, not as memory, but as texture, part of the moment itself. Her final act had become something larger than history, larger than legend. It had become part of the way humans end their days, part of the way they teach each other to rest. The milk shimmered in bowls across the world, across centuries, carrying not just flavor, but softness. And somewhere, beyond time, Cleopatra smiled not as a queen, but as a breath on the surface of warm milk, as a whisper in the hush before sleep, as the feeling of the body letting go of everything but calm. Have you ever noticed how the quietest traditions never really stop? They just shift shape, flowing silently beneath the surface of everyday life? Cleopatra's milk ritual became one of those traditions. It did not stay in history books, but it stayed in human breath, in warm kitchens, in the small choices people make each night when they decide to soften instead of hold on. Her choice to dissolve into the milk became more than an event. It became a rhythm woven into time. Somewhere, long after her name faded from temples and coins, a person stirred warm milk at the end of a long day, their hands moving without thought, their heart loosening with each circle of the spoon. They whispered into the steam, not because they knew why, but because the act of whispering to milk felt right, like a natural part of sleep, like something the body remembered even when the mind did not. In another home, far from Alexandria's shores, a family shared warm milk before bed. The parents did not explain the ritual. They simply did it, night after night, letting the practice teach itself. The children learned to breathe with the stirring, to match their thoughts to the gentle movement of the liquid, to let the warmth soak into their bones. No one mentioned queens or palaces. The story had dissolved, but the softness had remained. And that, perhaps, was Cleopatra's greatest victory. Not a name remembered, but a feeling carried forward. Somewhere, a healer prepared milk for someone who could not sleep. She added rose petals to the cup, stirred slowly, and whispered to the milk, "Hold this person softly tonight. Carry them into calm." The milk shimmered faintly under the lamp, as if it understood. The person drank, their breath slowing, their shoulders relaxing. They closed their eyes, not knowing that their sleep was part of a practice older than memory, part of a softness that had rippled forward from a queen who had once chosen to dissolve instead of fight. The milk carried the moment, folding the breath into warmth. In distant monasteries, monks continued similar practices. They prepared warm drinks before meditation, their hands steady, their thoughts settling into the same circles they stirred in the bowls. They whispered silently, not to gods, but to the act itself, letting their breath soften, their hearts loosen. They did not know Cleopatra's story. They only knew the milk brought calm. The ritual moved beyond borders, beyond cultures, becoming part of how humans prepared for sleep. In every place where people chose softness at the end of the day, Cleopatra's essence lingered not as a ruler, but as the texture of calm. Somewhere else, in the hush of a midnight room, a person alone prepared warm milk with saffron, watching the strands dissolve into gold. They stirred slowly, letting their mind follow the spirals, letting their body fold into the quiet. They whispered into the cup, "Let me be part of softness now. Let me release this day. Let me float." The milk carried their whisper, blending it into the long chain of similar whispers spoken across centuries. Cleopatra's ritual had become part of something larger, shared human need to find softness in a world that often demands sharpness. The milk ritual offered a gentle rebellion against that sharpness. It said, "You do not need to conquer the night. You can dissolve into it." Somewhere, a mother taught her daughter this lesson without using words. She prepared warm milk each night, stirring with care, humming softly. The child learned by watching, by breathing, by feeling her body relax as the warmth filled her chest. She would grow up carrying this softness, teaching it to someone else one day, never needing to explain where it came from. The milk would remember. The act of stirring would carry the memory forward. The practice had become part of the bodies. Wisdom, like blinking, like sighing, like closing the eyes when sleep approaches. And somewhere, beyond time, Cleopatra watched not from a throne, but from the texture of the moment itself. She was there in the steam rising from the cup, in the hush of breath before the first sip, in the loosened shoulders of someone choosing to rest. Her decision to dissolve into the milk had become part of the way humans softened. It was no longer a ritual of beauty or power. It was a ritual of calm, of letting go, of becoming part of something too gentle to be broken. The milk carried this practice quietly. It moved from hand to hand, from breath to breath, changing slightly with each new life, but always keeping its core: warmth, breath, softness, sleep. Somewhere, a traveler in a cold night prepared milk over a small flame, watching the liquid swirl, feeling their heartbeats slow. They did not think of history. They thought only of calm. They whispered into the milk, not in full sentences, but in sighs, in feelings, in the soft language of breath. And the milk listened, as it always had. It remembered every person who had chosen softness over sharpness. Every breath let out gently into the night. Cleopatra's choice echoed in each of these moments, not as a command, but as an invitation. You can soften. You can dissolve. You can let go. Somewhere else, in a crowded city, a person alone in their apartment prepared warm milk after a long day. They stirred it in silence, letting the warmth rise to their face, letting the air around them soften. They sipped slowly, feeling the day's noise fade into something quieter. They closed their eyes and drifted toward sleep, held not by history, but by softness. Cleopatra was there too, not as a memory, but as part of the atmosphere. Her final act lived in the warmth of the milk, in the hush of breath before sleep, in the quiet choice to release the day's weight. And so the ritual continued not as legend, but as life. Have you ever noticed how certain habits feel like they've always existed, even when no one remembers who began them? Cleopatra's milk ritual became one of those quiet, living threads, woven through human time. It no longer belonged to any one person. It belonged to the night, to the breath before sleep, to the soft hush that arrives when the day is ready to dissolve. Somewhere, long after Cleopatra's name faded from royal scrolls, a person sat by the edge of their bed, hands wrapped around a warm cup of milk. Their breath slowed as the steam rose, carrying away the sharpness of the day. They stirred the milk with a small spoon, moving in soft circles, their mind following the motion, releasing thoughts gently into the liquid. They whispered not loudly, not even in words sometimes, but in sighs, in soft murmurs only the milk could hear. Let me soften. Let me float. Let me drift. The milk shimmered, holding the whisper as it had held so many before, carrying it forward, like a silent tide. In another place, across the ocean of time, a woman sat with her child, teaching them the same ritual. She did not speak of queens or ancient lands. She only showed the child how to hold the cup with both hands, how to breathe slowly, how to sip warmth into the body, letting it settle into the chest. The child smiled, their eyes growing heavy with sleep, the milk calming them without any need for history lessons or legends. And yet, somewhere in that moment, Cleopatra was present, not as a queen, not as a figure in history, but as part of the softness that wrapped itself around the child's body, guiding them into rest. The milk remembered, even if no one else did. It carried her choice forward generation after generation, breath after breath. Somewhere else, a healer prepared milk for someone sick, adding herbs to ease the body, but keeping the rhythm of the ritual the same. Stir slowly, whisper, breathe with the liquid. The person drank, their heartbeat calming, their mind loosening its grip on pain. They drifted into sleep, held by warmth, by breath, by the milk's memory of softness. Cleopatra's final act had become part of the way humans healed, not just the body, but the mind. The ritual had expanded beyond beauty, beyond ceremony. It had become a medicine for the heart. Somewhere, under a quiet moon, a person alone prepared milk, not for themselves, but for someone they loved. They stirred it in silence, their thoughts gentle, their movements slow. When they handed the cup over, they passed not just warmth, but care, a kind of unspoken tenderness wrapped in the act of sharing softness. The person drinking the milk felt that tenderness in their chest, even if no words were spoken. And the milk held both breaths, the givers and the receivers, carrying them together into calm. In distant cities, in small villages, in places where no one thought about Cleopatra anymore, the same practice continued. People prepared warm milk not as a ritual, but as a part of life. They stirred without rushing. They breathed without forcing. They let go without ceremony. The milk shimmered in bowls and cups, in basins and pots, each serving holding the weight of hundreds of years of quiet repetition. Somewhere, a poet sat awake in the middle of the night, words swirling in their mind like leaves in a breeze. They prepared milk, stirring it slowly, letting their thoughts settle into the motion. They whispered to the liquid, "Take this noise from me. Leave me with softness." They sipped the milk, their mind calming, their heart loosening. Sleep approached like mist on water, and the poet folded into it, held by the same softness Cleopatra had once chosen at the end of her life. In temples, in homes, in quiet corners of the world, the practice continued. The milk was warmed, the breath slowed, the sharpness of the day released into the liquid. People whispered into the cups, not always in words, but in feelings. The milk carried these whispers, blending them into the long memory of human calm. Cleopatra's story was not carved into stone for this part. It was not sung in songs or written in scrolls. It was carried in hands, in breath, in the soft rhythm of stirring circles into warm milk. Somewhere, a person standing by a window in the dark prepared milk after a long day. They thought of nothing in particular. They only wanted calm. They stirred the liquid slowly, their body relaxing as the warmth rose into the air. They closed their eyes, letting go of the day, their breath, folding softly into the night. And in that moment, Cleopatra's choice was alive again, not as a historical event, but as a texture in the world, as a softness passed quietly from life to life. The milk remembered all of this. It held no grudges, no sharpness, only warmth. It carried the echo of a queen who had chosen to become part of the hush, part of the breath between day and sleep. Somewhere, a person in a distant time would do the same thing tomorrow. They would warm milk, stir slowly, and whisper into the steam. They would not know where the practice came from, but the softness would work just the same. The milk would carry their breath forward, joining the long, quiet line of those who had chosen calm over conquest, softness over struggle, rest over resistance. And somewhere beyond history, beyond time, Cleopatra would still be there, not as a memory, but as part of the hush before sleep, as part of the softness in the breath that lets go. Lets go. Have you ever wondered if some endings are so soft, so gentle, that they never truly end? Cleopatra's story reached that kind of ending, a dissolving, not a disappearance. She had once ruled kingdoms, shaped history, and commanded armies. But in the final nights of her life, she chose something else. She chose the milk. She chose the softness. She chose to become part of the night, part of the breath before sleep, part of the warm hush that folds around the human body at the end of the day. And because she chose softness instead of stone, her legacy did not stop with her last breath. It became part of something quieter, something more lasting than empires. Somewhere tonight, someone is stirring warm milk before sleep. Their hand moves in slow circles, not because of tradition, but because it feels natural. The spoon glides through the liquid, the petals swirl softly, and the steam rises into the air. They breathe in, letting the warmth settle into their chest. They breathe out, letting the day slip away. They whisper into the milk, not in full sentences, but in sighs, in small, private thoughts they do not need to share with anyone else. Let me soften. Let me release. Let me drift. And the milk listens, as it has for centuries, carrying the whisper forward. In another place, a mother teaches her child how to prepare warm milk at night. She does not speak of Cleopatra. She does not mention history. She just shows the child how to move slowly, how to breathe with the stirring, how to hold the cup with both hands and feel the warmth. The child smiles, the day's sharpness fading from their mind. They learn not just how to drink milk, but how to enter sleep softly, how to carry calm into their dreams. Somewhere else, a person sits alone after a long day, the weight of life pressing on their shoulders. They prepare warm milk, not as a cure, but as a kindness. They stir it gently, letting the circles soften their breath. They sip slowly, letting the warmth melt the tight places inside their chest. They close their eyes, folding into calm. Cleopatra's final act lives in that moment, not as a story, but as a sensation. Somewhere in the quiet, she is still present, not as a queen, but as the hush between day and night, as the softness in the milk, as the sigh that comes just before sleep. The world outside continues to change. Cities rise and fall. Names come and go, but the ritual remains. People still prepare warm milk at night, not because they read it in books, but because their bodies remember how it feels to let go softly. The act of stirring becomes a meditation. The breath slows without effort. The heart loosens its grip on the day. Somewhere, a healer passes the practice to someone in need. Stir the milk slowly, she says. Whisper into it if you wish. Sip gently. Let the warmth carry you into rest. The person follows the instructions, their breath matching the rhythm of the circles. They drift into sleep, held not by medicine, but by memories stored not in the mind, but in the body, in the breath, in the simple act of softening. Cleopatra's choice ripples through these moments, quietly, without name or claim. It has become part of the human way of closing a day, of softening a mind, of preparing for sleep. The milk carries her still not as a symbol of power, but as a vessel of calm. And perhaps that is the true secret. Softness lasts longer than sharpness. Warmth outlives war. Breath outlasts conquest. Somewhere tonight, under a sky that does not care about history, someone will prepare warm milk and feel the same softness Cleopatra once chose. They will not know they are part of a lineage. They will not need to know. Their breath will slow, their eyes will close, and the milk will hold them as it has held generations before. Somewhere, a person will whisper into the steam, "Let me drift, let me soften, let me dissolve." And in that moment, Cleopatra's final act will live again, not in legend, but in life, not in memory, but in muscle, in breath, in warmth. The milk will shimmer quietly, as it always has, carrying softness forward, passing it from hand to hand, from heart to heart, from night to night. And so the story will continue not as a history, but as a hush,